1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, and welcome to the Vininspo podcast with me, Ed Merrison. This is where wine is a travel experience. Join us as we pick up bits and pieces, make new friends, and create memories that make our future interactions with wine, people, and places all the more meaningful and fun. My guest on this week's podcast is Stephen Pannell. Steve is rightly recognised as one of Australia's most forward-thinking vignerons, probing the fundaments of fine wine, testing his beliefs and putting his money where his mouth is. In the process, he's become perhaps the most broadly decorated wine grower of his generation, winning this country's most prestigious awards for a dazzling array of wines from Shiraz through Grenache to Nebbiolo and beyond under his SC Pannell, Protero and Camellia labels. He's never been one to shy away from a tough question. In fact, he's posed many of them to himself. And as you'll learn from this conversation, he is extremely generous in sharing his experience in all its light and shade. Before we kick off, a quick reminder that if you like your coverage of wine and the world to be original, thoughtful and enriching, please do whatever you can to breathe life into ventures like Vininspo. There are heaps of ways to do this, but public and online displays of affection go a long way, so please give the work a like or a rating, leave a comment, share it with your people, become a free or paid subscriber, all of the above. But that's enough from me. Let's hear from the star of the show, Stephen Pannell of McLaren Vale. I started by asking Steve where he felt at home when he was young.
We lived next to the ocean, and that was very formative for me. I don't know, the ocean seems to be this all-conquering, cleansing thing that whenever still to this day, before I go to do a day at Vintage, I'll get in the ocean. It's a bit like a Etch-a-Sketch, you know, those things you used to draw on, and where you go and you wipe it clean. That's what getting in the ocean is for me. And I spent a lot of time and a lot by myself, really, fishing, catching crabs, doing all that. I mean, Brian Crozer and Led Evans both said that they first met me when I took them crabbing when they came to stay with us in Busselton. So the ocean was a huge part of my life and still continues to be a part of my life. I didn't have a normal childhood, and I won't go into why or what, but there were a whole lot of reasons that ended up where it wasn't a happy childhood. And I can remember thinking no child of mine will ever go through this. So I don't want to get into it, but it's been a long journey of trying to rectify that. So wine was part of the background, where Dad was very much, he was a doctor during the week and a winemaker on the weekends. And so all of us were conscripted almost to go to the vineyard without choice. Everything was hand labelled. They'd be polished. We would dig tanks. We'd do anything that was there. The only way out was to play sport, and I used to play every sport known to mankind to avoid having to go do winery things, because we'd have to trim, we'd shoot thin, we'd do everything when we weren't busy. So you just stayed busy. So I'd play hockey and football in winter, and I'd usually ride my bike. So I was very physical, and it was 3 miles to where I'd go to, because that's how old I am. There was miles back then. And then I'd play 2 games of cricket on the weekends, which was good. I really enjoyed it.
Was cricket your best sport?
Possibly. I was always small. Like, I didn't go through puberty till quite late, and I was tiny. And so that was probably an issue more than anything else as to how I played sport. I was fearless. I can remember being knocked out several times playing AFL. So I just, despite my size, I didn't really care. So I'd always just get smashed.
That doesn't surprise me, and I can imagine you pouring yourself into lots of different things. In terms of your curiosity back then, were there any other things that you found yourself really investigating?
Yeah, like classical guitar. So my father, he didn't have the best childhood, but he wanted me to learn a musical instrument. And so one of my friends was playing guitar, and I said, I'd like to learn guitar. And I had this idea that I'd end up in a rock band or playing bloody chords. And he sent me to this classical guitarist to learn classical guitar. So I started to play, and I did play for a long time classical guitar. And I learnt from this old guy called Mr. Sheen. He wasn't Polish, he was my music teacher. And he had this collection of records. And so I think more than anything, music was an enormous part of my life. I was obsessed with Countdown, as everybody was in my age. And in the country, there wasn't much other than Saturday and Sunday Countdown. And just loved music in every way. yes, that was a big thing. When I went to boarding school for the last 2 years of my high school, I just fell in love with bands like New Order, Depeche Mode, stuff like that, which we have a common friend who has a love for all these things. So, I think music probably more than anything saved my life. I owe a lot to music, and still to this day, like, it's everywhere. My children are completely obsessed with it too. So music's a very, very important part of my life.
Do you still play at all?
It was funny. I sort of gave it up because I wanted to just learn an ear. So I play a bit, but my son has picked it up. And so I bought this Telecaster one time for myself to sort of learn to play. And it came home when he was about 15. And I got it to the lounge room and then it's disappeared into his bedroom and never come out. So, yeah, he plays a lot.
And what about from an academic point of view?
I was hopeless.
Really?
I see it now, and we'll talk about it in a bit, but, I got diagnosed with ADHD last year after my daughter kept going, you've got it, you've got it, you've got it. And the psychiatrist that I was seeing at the time sort of said, there's no way you can be as successful and you whilst you've got ADHD. And then I held on to that for a while, and then somebody said, look, I think you do. You better go and talk to somebody. So I can remember sitting on this lounge room one day, filling in the questionnaires going, oh, shit. And so I've always had attention problems, and I've always been fascinated by the next shiny thing. So I can see now that was part of what was my childhood. I never did that well at school. I didn't love school. In fact, I hated it. And going to boarding school was really, really hard. That was just a whole lot of bullying and Catholic guilt that's just, we won't go there. But I didn't like that. I really only found my feet as a human being, I think, when I was, 22. I think I did 1 year of university, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. My father actually filled in what I was going to do at university. I didn't even have a choice. I ended up doing maths, physics, chemistry, and computer science. And I didn't want to be a teacher. I had nothing vested in the game. And so it took a while for me to really find where I wanted to be. I'd just come back from France. I went to Sydney in my first break of university and was working for a guy in a bottle shop. Actually, I was working in a bottle shop with Hugh and Hook before he'd really started writing. And I sort of I found out that I had this knowledge of wine that I didn't know I had because I absorbed it through all the things that were going on. And so I did that. Then I went to France to do some touring around, first trip overseas, and then come back and got a bottle shop job in Bondi Junction. So I was in Bondi Junction working and ended up getting a scholarship. And I thought, well, I'll do the winemaking course, which is 3 years. It's an extra year on what the marketing course is, but I'll probably go back to selling wine and working with wine in that way rather than the production side of it.
You said that you absorbed things and knew things you didn't think that you knew. And I've always been really struck by what seem to be perceptions that you've had in the past that are really quite crystallized in your mind. Did you always have quite a strong sense of, I don't know, what you were tasting, what you were listening to, and how it managed to hold on to your memory?
No, my childhood was like, I can best equate it to being in a gelatinous bubble, which I let nothing in and nothing out. And it was never a happy place. It was always on edge. I was just surviving. And I survived as a child. And really, when I'd left home, when I started to make friends, when I started to explore, and this is important, cooking, especially when I'd got away, had a mate who was an Indian guy, and I started to cook Indian food. And then I'd always cooked as a kid to sort of keep the peace or to show love and appreciation. That's how I'd do it. And so I'd done that, and then living in Sydney, I was thrown to my own devices where I could be my own person. And a guy called Jim Whittle, who was this 6'4" guy, and I was living in King's Cross. And so I was thrown right in the deep end, and he'd sort of throw me out at music clubs and go and meet people. Or like I got there day one and he said, oh, you're doing a delivery over to there, to the MLC Centre. And I said, well, what's that? And he just went, see that big tall building over there? It's there. Go find it. So he pushed me out of my comfort zone, and he'd ask me, like, there's a steak. Do you like it well done, medium rare? I said, I like it well done. He said, well, no, you don't. Not from now on. This is how you have it. So he taught me very much what he'd been to the Cordon Bleu school, and he didn't pay me, but he said, you can drink whatever you like in this house. And at that stage, There was all the 82 Bordeaux's we were living on top of. There was everything you could possibly want. A bottle of Bollinger RD was $29. So I had an education through wine with that way, and remember doing a lot of tastings in those early days, especially with Hookie, learning about wine and where the world of wine sat. Mum and Dad had a domain in Burgundy, and I think that was fundamental. I can remember going to Burgundy. Geez, this would have been 1985, meeting Becky Wasserman, meeting Dominic Lafont when he was 21, Bertie Eden from Maris. And so meeting these people at a very young age. Then Paul Wasserman, her son, came out and lived with me in Australia for some time. And then I got a scholarship. And yeah, as I said, I went to Roseworthy, and that's where I met everybody. And that's where I really found my feet. I can remember doing first year, and we weren't doing any winemaking. It was all the drab, boring biology and microbiology and all these sorts of things. And I thought, oh, bugger this. I just want to buy a ton of grapes and make a wine. So I went to Gumaraka. I don't know why. Bought a ton of Pinot and just decided that I'd make it. So I'd never actually been responsible from go to woe for making my own wine. So I made that wine and just found this instant link between cooking and the sort of just this touchstone, which was the levels of complexity that are involved in what goes into making wine. I was naive at that point, and it opened a door I haven't been able to shut to this point. And probably if I look back, wine was never ever it was never a conscious decision. That it sort of dragged me there rather than I was compelling myself to go there.
You didn't enjoy school at all, but the cohort at Roseworthy, did you suddenly find that you were with people who were somehow like-minded and you were just having fun and feeling yourself?
Well, I think it's quite bizarre. I started to actually excel. So I had an A- average for the entire course. And it's just because I wanted to do it and I wanted to understand and know. And that's the most amazing thing with learning. Up to that point, I just survived. I didn't have a lot of faith in myself, or didn't have a lot of confidence about things, but starting to succeed in and be my own person. And I exposed myself to as many people to learn about being a better person. And so it was very formative, these people in my lives, about what their values were that were different to what my childhood values were. And I sort of just sucked up all the information that I possibly could. And then at Roseworthy, I met a great group of people who became my very close friends. Virginia Wilcox is pretty much like my sister to a degree, and we lived together for that whole first year. And Reed Boswood was another one. And then Peter Gago was in my class, and John Davies and Nick Hazelgrove and Wendy Stuckey. We had a really interesting group of people, and we had a lot of fun. Yeah, they were good days. I had a lot of fun playing rugby and doing all sorts of things with different people.
How did that first Gumaraka Pinot turn out?
It was all right, actually. I sort of made it with 20% whole bunches. I was interested in whole bunches and sort of Pinot at those days. Well, in those days, nobody really went to Pinot. Actually, it was odd. Nobody talked about making light red wines at all. And it stayed that way for 10 or 12 years. And my days in Hardy's took a lot of convincing people to fall in love with Pinot and light-bodied wines. Was an uphill battle that nobody really saw would be there. The minute I could get out of Australia, I went to Burgundy to work at Domaine de la Pustor with Gerard Patel and my dear friend Nico. And so, yeah, I spent a lot of time in Burgundy learning. And Gerard taught me so many things about wine. We had a fractured relationship initially because he thought I was there to sort of take over the domain, or wanting to take over the domain, which I wasn't at all. I was more there and interested in just learning. He was hard. Like Australians always stuff things up. Don't smash this, don't smash that. Don't break the hydrometer. Don't do this, don't do that. But after a while, we sort of became friends. And I can remember standing in a vineyard with him, and he was just looking at the fruit and going, this year I think I'm going to make it like this. And I'm going, oh, how are you making these decisions based on looking and tasting some fruit? And I think that's still the most difficult thing that I continue to learn, is what great grapes make great wine. And then the other thing he said to me is that most of the time in winemaking, it's harder to do nothing than do something. And I think that's true of many aspects of life, that the simplest things are the most difficult to conquer. And this really, the person that I am now in terms of my love of many things, food especially and cooking, is probably more important to me than wine. So I cook all the time. I'm incessant in it. I relax by making cocktails. I'm interested not just in wine, but in flavour and how that balances and how you use it. and cooking's influenced my winemaking, and winemaking's influenced my cooking a lot. And that's how I relax. As soon as I am in this house, it's the thing I hate about traveling is that I can't cook. And so I'm totally obsessive about cooking.
Cool. And so after Burgundy, what happened next?
That was 1991. Came back, got a job at Wira Wira. Was 2 years at Wira Wira. Went back to France the following year with a guy called Jacques Leton, who was setting up a business with his brother Francois in the south of France. So helped run a whole lot of wineries in the south of France, in Narbonne, Carcassonne. We had one in Spain and then several in Entre-deux-Mers and Grave. And so I was working for him. Had a chance to stay in France, and I was reading that Bruce Chatwin book, Songlines, and just missed home and just went, I'm never going to be France. Actually, what's in me is in this book, and I just want to get home. So came home, got a job with Napsteins, were purchased by Petaluma, and Andrew Hardy asked me to be the winemaker at Napsteins. And so I went up there, and just by pure chance, Tim Napstein had the Lenswood Vineyards with Pinot Noir. And so away we went, and Tim and I became great friends, worked there for 2 years, and then I was poached by Hardy's. Peter Dawson and Tim James asked me to come and be the winemaker at Tintara. So started making wine at Tintara, no Pinot Noir at all there, but Grenache became my Pinot Noir. And so worked there for 3-4 years, got lucky enough to get a Jimmy Watson in year one with that. So that took the pressure off, changed a lot of things. Actually, I can never thank Peter Dawson for the faith that he showed in me. We changed everything. We got rid of heading down boards. We got rid of oak chips. We just changed style on a dime. And that was really important. I'd been back to Burgundy to work with Dominique Lafont because I had this friendship with Dom, and then just stayed at Hardy's. They wanted me to go to Bordeaux, which I ended up doing. Went to Mouton Rothschild, worked there, ended up being the chief winemaker for Hardy's, and was, it's way over 200 million bottles of red wine per annum. Had our second child. And I wasn't happy. I just wasn't making wine. I was managing people and running around telling people how to make wine, but my knowledge had stopped. I didn't have the ability to have purple hands, and that really upset me. So I had a long talk to Fee, and she wanted me to stay to 9 years to get my long service leave, which I did. And the minute that was done, we sort of took off and went to Barolo. So we moved to Barolo with a 3-month-old and a 3-year-old. And I specifically said, I don't want to be paid. I just want to make wine. And so David Gleave is an interesting person who I've known for a long time. And David set this up to work with the Vira family. So that's how that happened.
We might have to just go back a little bit because that's a fascinating trajectory. The first thing I was going to ask really was, you said that you changed things on a dime at Hardy's in terms of how things were done. At the time that things were happening in the Australian wine industry, I guess it had a lot of wind in its sails in part of that era, but those changes you made probably foreshadowed quite a lot of other changes that came along later. How was it that you were able to make so much change in such a short period of time?
I don't know. I don't know where that drive or where that forethought or I don't know how you say it, where that really came from. It comes from, I've always instinctively tried to make wine that I love, and that was part of it. The stuff you do in the early days is not some of your best. But in my job in Hardy's, they told me that I had to win awards. That's all I had to do. And that was somewhat soul-destroying. It ran counterintuitive to a lot of the things that I did. It didn't run counterintuitive with Grenache, because Grenache, there was no blueprint at what Australian Grenache was. So I picked up that Pinot-esque thing. And although the early ones they're medium to full-bodied rather than medium to light-bodied, what they are now, they were certainly medium-bodied. I remember the early days of trying to convince Hardy's to make Pinot Noir. And that was a really difficult thing, especially in Queensland. You'd to go up there, then all the samples, the Pinots that you made would be thrown in a fridge and everyone would laugh at you for serving them. Like, it's difficult for people to understand how hard it was in that era of, I call them gladiatorial wines, that making light to medium-bodied wines was just off. No one thought about it at all. So it was right out to the left. It was all about getting 100 points from Robert Parker, was what everybody was trying to get in those days. So I was just backing off oak, getting away from American oak. And again, that guy Jim, who I work for in Sydney, he hates oak. And so every time I'd try to show him a wine and go, oh, look what I've done now, too oaky, and he'd just at me all the time. And so, yeah, there was changes in that way. We backed it off. We did a lot of trials. We had some amazing people working there, like Kerry Thompson, Rob Mann, Larry Cherubino. There was just so many people that were involved in that group of people. And we did think that we could change the landscape of Australian wine and influence what was going on. And we were given the keys to one of the largest companies in this country. And Peter Dawson had the faith in us to just go for it. So that's what we all did. And it was an amazing, exciting time where we could experiment. And I learned so much about relationships between pH and ripeness. We just get one vineyard and pick it every second day and go, right, how does this work? And then we'd experiment with different oaks. We just experimented so much. We said it was like playing darts with your eyes closed. Occasionally you hit the bullseye and went, oh, how did I do that? And so that was really informative to me as to what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it.
You said that you didn't enjoy the fact that you ended up having to manage because what you wanted to do was keep doing and learning rather than managing people. But at the same time, there are a lot of people that are very grateful that you didn't just do that. Everyone that you've just mentioned has talked about the influence that you've had. I think it might have been Anna Flaude who first mentioned it, that it wasn't just that they learnt a lot, but they've done their own version of what they really wanted to do and what they really believed in. This sense of conviction is really what seems to have come out of those Hardy days. That idea that you're not pushing style and you're not pushing for accolades. You're actually finding out what you really enjoy in terms of flavors and structures and nuances. And they've been sort of almost scattered to the winds across Australia and New Zealand, these people, and they are absolute forerunners who really believe in what they do. And I think that that's quite remarkable. And you must feel pretty pleased about it.
I do feel, I don't know how it happened. I really don't. But I do feel hugely proud. And we all have a strong bond to this day, all of us. I've just spent time with Kerry at the Len Evans tutorial, and it's the same. There is this way of doing things, I suppose. And I suppose it comes down to the question that I've always asked, and I don't know whether I've really answered too, is what is great wine? And why am I so fascinated by this thing, which is also in a lot of, especially through my childhood, conflicting. I'm drawn to this thing reluctantly, and I'm obsessed with it and have a sort of standoffish relationship about it because it's very easy to become a big fat alcoholic winemaker if you're not careful. But what it is that fascinates me is the question that I've always tried to answer. And I think I got down to this point where I think great wine all over the world obeys a very simple set of rules. And those rules are what I've applied since I could make my own wines. They've been absolutely fundamental to what we have to do. And I think number one in all of that is that great wine tastes like it comes from somewhere. And so a lot of other products try to bring that into their marketing. This vinegar's from the Barossa, or this Berkshire pig is from here, but you can't taste that. It's a marketing tool. But with wine, you really can. And so I'm very much interested in making wines that taste like they come from somewhere. And if you look at all the great wines, especially from Italy and Spain and France, that's the most important thing when you're selling this wine or when you're labeling this wine. It's not the variety, it's that it comes from Burgundy and it comes from this vineyard. The variety is secondary, and the producer is the third most important power on that. So if you take that hierarchy, then you go, okay, so if I make a wine that tastes like I made it, then it's wrong. It needs to taste like it comes from that site and I made it. I can't not be involved. And that's what Paolo De Marchi talked very strongly about when we were going through this process of natural wine and nobody did anything and everything was natural. But that's not true. The vine doesn't grow like that. A vine will grow up a tree and it wants to put a berry right up the top so a bird can grab it and take it and excrete it out somewhere else and grow another vine. It's not interested in making wine, as does every fruit tree. We pick a vine on one day. There isn't a single fruit tree that you've got anywhere that you're exposed to where all that fruit is ready on one day. So you have to manipulate how it grows, and then the decision of picking. So Paolo reinforced that idea. Renaissance is about human involvement. And so there is this beautiful balance between nature and humans and how we work together to get this thing that's in balance. And that's a beautiful thing. It still befuddles me how I can take a stick or a cutting and I put it in the ground and then 3 years later I'm making a drink out of it. That part of it is never lost on me.
Now, we'll probably go on a bit of a Nebbiolo tangent, and I'm very happy to do that because we mentioned upping sticks to Barolo, and I know it's a place that's very dear to your heart, and also the Vara family, I suppose, encompass that coming together of the artistry, the beautiful landscapes that they look to express, and a sense of sensitivity towards that nature. Very traditional at the same time as a thoroughly acute awareness of now, I feel, in those wines. So that must have been a very formative time there in Barolo.
Yeah, I mean, Nebbiolo's always been a wine that challenged me. I remember in the 80s opening a bottle at the bottle shop I was working in. It's like, what's this Barolo thing? Opening it and going, oh, ghastly. It's a horrible colour and doesn't have much flavour and the tannins are weird and what the hell's going on here? And I think it was an old Prunotto. And so this is just not my scene. And then slowly but surely, and especially there's a very good friend of mine, Tim White, and he's always had this future vision of where wine is. He was into Austrian wine before anybody or Greek wine before anybody, but he'd always been obsessed with Barolo. I remember going to a tasting that David Ridge had done in town and trying two wines. One was from Bruno Giacosa, who is to this day my favourite producer of Barolos, and Pyrrha, and trying those two wines. And David said, like, Steve, do you want to comment on this wine? And I can remember saying, yes, if I could just have a bath full of it, I don't think I'd ever get out. So it was just this amazing thing. What captured me was the contradictory nature of it. And it answered so many elements of what it is about wine that I like. And it's encapsulated in this one wine. So if we go through the attributes of Nebbiolo, colour, well, it's got horrible colour. So I flippantly say these days, I make wine, I don't make paint, so colour doesn't bother me. And it's true. It's just gone out of my repertoire of what a wine looks like. I don't really care. Aroma is fundamental. So that perfume is so important. The commonality between Pinot and Nebbiolo in terms of that perfume. And I'm sure that it's linked to all the experiences that I've had from being in that place. No different to a love song when you break up with a girl. There is this emotional connection, and we'll get back to emotional connection in wine in a bit, but I think it's something that we don't understand strongly enough. And so then medium to light bodied, that's important. So why is that important? Because I think with the great wines of the world, you're talking about something that's actually contradictory in nature. And so you're trying to set up this juxtaposition which entertains your brain. So there's something that's powerful, concentrated, complex, dense, intense in terms of the flavour, but refined, elegant, light and delicate with finesse. And so if I can get those two things, which are totally contradictory in every way, working together, that's what holds my interest. And that's what keeps me going. It is so easy in terms of over-ripening, over-oaking, over-flavoured, all that sort of stuff. Balance, refinement, delicacy, that's where the art really, really, really lies. And it's no different to cooking. Actually, the things you start to cook when you go, wow, here's 24 ingredients in this, let me do this. They're the easy ones. The difficult ones are when you've got 3 ingredients and you're trying to make something. That's where the art really lies, because you rely on the ingredients and you rely on your knowledge and experience to make this thing. Lastly, with Nebbiolo, it's about tannin. If there was one element that I could take away from Nebbiolo, and it would not be Nebbiolo anymore, it's tannin. And tannin is so important. And in Nebbiolo, it has a flavour that I can smell as well. When the good ones are tannic, I know you can't smell tannin. My dad would whack me. But I can smell this thing in them, and then the tannins have such beautiful flavour. And I think that's really spurred me on, not just with the Nebbiolos I make, but with the Grenaches, with all the wines I make, that we limit the varietal characteristics of red wine purely down to the fruit, be that flavour or aroma, but really a red wine's varietal characteristics in terms of the way its tannins feel, that are fundamentally different in each one, is just as important to explore. And tannin is such an important weapon for me because the wines I love are tannic. And so I'm unashamedly making wines that I love, and they will always be tannic. And I think in a way, Australians are tannin phobic, and there's a whole lot of reasons we can get into with it, but we don't make tannic wines. Yet the thing I think that I fight a lot in McLaren Vale is the wines are too flavoursome, too sweet, too rich. And so I'm trying to do the opposite to this. And tannin is my number one weapon at controlling sweetness in a wine.
You don't have the ocean right on your doorstep when you're up in Barolo, but you do have a beautiful landscape, a almost simple but perfect cuisine, and those incredibly evocative wines. Those 3 elements all seem to be so well married in your image of that place. I'm just wondering if it made you also think about what was possible, talking about songlines, in McLaren Vale, to marry that lifestyle, that place, and the flavours that should be there.
Yeah, look, I mean, I didn't fully comprehend what moving to Barolo with a young family at that point entailed. And most of the time when I've worked for people overseas, they're skeptical of Australians. They just keep you occupied. They don't sort of actively engage you in the winemaking and seek out your advice. And I mean, I think I was International Red Winemaker of the Year when I was at Mouton. And I was going, this ferment's going a bit volatile. But I was more interested in not smashing a Rodin sculpture whilst dragging a hose around. When I got to Vieras, Aldo, the first thing he said to me was, well, firstly, we sorted out that neither of us spoke each other's language, but we both spoke French. So we communicated in French. And he said to me, do you know much about Pinot? And I said, yes, I do. He said, well, good. Can you make it? And his wife, I only found out 20 years later when I took my son back to work there, Milena said, I still don't know why on that day, a perfect stranger who he'd never met before, he said, can you make our Pinot Noir? So I made this first Pinot Noir, and then he said to me, do you know much about Riesling? And I've found out later, because I'm obsessed, when I'm in a winery, I've always got a glass, I'm always tasting. And Aldo identified that with his grandfather. And so we automatically struck up this relationship where he saw in me the same traits as his grandfather. And so he had this enormous faith. And Aldo's not the easiest person. He's a very intelligent, very driven person. And he just let me go. He knew everybody in the whole district. His job before people got married was to explain the birds and the bees to the husband. And he was a lecturer from the university. So he would send me out and I would visit everybody and I'd talk to them in depth about how they made their wines, what they did. I'd come back to see Aldo and said, they do this and they do that. We had some issues, like he had too much Nebbiolo. He said, I don't know what I'm going to do this. I said, we can make a rosé. So I rang David Gleave from Liberty Wines in the UK, who got onto Jamie Oliver when we made a rosé. And when I rang David to go, look, I'm thinking of this, what do we do? He said, can you just stop there for a tick? And I said, sure. He said, this is the first time an Italian producer has rung me to seek my opinion about what might sell, what price it would be. The new whole dawn of Italy. And so we ended up making a rosé, which they named after my daughter, Rosabella, and Bella's my daughter's name. And I just fell so firmly on my feet. There was a time, I think within the first week, I was up the top of a tank doing something, and these Australians came through. And Milena was walking through, and these Australians went to Milena, is that Steve Pannell? And they go, you know Steve? Because they had no idea who I was, what my experience was, or what I'd done at all, nothing. And so I just fell in love back with winemaking. My children were happy. Milena used to look after my daughter and my father-in-law was there and we just had an absolute ball. I can so clearly see so many dinners. Aldo would take me out once a week to a special restaurant somewhere. We'd drive an hour and a half away to eat somebody's place and every menu, every ingredient was cheese. And we went to a restaurant to this day where Fiona had the best meal that she's ever had in her life, which was guinea fowl and chestnuts. And so there's so many experiences. And this is what I say to Finn. It's like, but how much money will I earn in this place? I never got paid a cent anywhere apart from with Jacques Louton working overseas. I didn't want it and I didn't need it. And it actually opened up doors that I can never, ever repay these people for what they've given me. And the time I spent with Aldo, we'd be the last people in the winery most nights. And I was happy. I was so happy just making wine, back doing what I loved. There's a thing called the Peter Principle where you get promoted to the point of incompetence, basically, in large companies. I didn't train to be a manager. I didn't train to be an accountant. I didn't train to be a marketer. I didn't train to do any of those things. I had to write reports. And again, once I've now learned that I've got ADHD, doing that stuff was torturous for me. I hated all that stuff. I mean, I don't even go to the meetings of my own company for the board meetings. I just don't. I just can't do it. And we've gone through this process with SCP now where it's actually Fiona who does all that sort of stuff. I make wine. I put it into bottles and boxes. I help promote and sell it. But in terms of the accounting, in terms of all that stuff that I'd had to look after, it was just soul destroying for me to do that sort of stuff. And so I'm very lucky that Fiona and Tom Grant, our general manager, they do all that stuff and sort of take it off my plate. So I'm back to where I love to be, and that's mucking around with wine.
And so when did the seed start germinating for doing your own thing with your own name on it?
It never did. I saw the stress that Moss would put everybody under, and so I'd never wanted my own vineyards. I'd never wanted my own label. I'd left Hardy's pretty much to worked for Warren Randall, who was doing things then, helping him make his wines. And so it just came about where I had some access to some fruit. I was like, well, I make 200 cases of a few things. I remember sitting down the first night with Fiona going, well, we better work out how much money we're going to make out of this. After the calculation of what I wanted to sell it for, that was nothing. And so that's how that worked out. I just made 200 cases of 3 things, and 2 of them were Grenache based. And so that's how it pretty much started, and had no desires to own a winery, own vineyards or any of that. And I'm quickly learning the minute I say never will I do that, I'm pretty well stuffed. It ends up happening no matter what the hell I try to do to stop it. And so, yeah, it was never a conscious thought that I was going to do this. Actually, it was more scrambling to go, oh shit, what am I going to call it now? And in a way, I'd wish that I hadn't called it after myself. Yeah, I wish I'd done something else with that.
And so not really a vision as such. It sounds like you probably weren't going to make any money out of it because of what you wanted to sell it for. Was it always an idea to have a label, if you had one, that was accessible, that made those wines that had all those elements that you valued, a sense of place and texture, flavour, everything in balance and a bit of tension, but at good value? Was that always something you'd strived for?
It's a funny position. Like I turned 60 this year. And like, I've just sort of sat back and gone, why don't you do anything easy that everybody else does? Why do you constantly want to fight and battle? You know, it's been 30 years of making Grenaches, more than that now. It's exactly 30 years this year of making Grenaches and trying to get medium-bodied, warm climate wines accepted. Then, you know, Mark Lloyd did a huge lot with alternate varieties, but going, look, actually, varieties that come from a climate that's similar to where we live probably suit where we live better, but also the people that made these wines in these places, their fundamental purpose of all of it was to drink the damn thing. It wasn't to sell it to somebody else. It was actually, and I think that's a big disconnect that we've had. I think we've rectified it now, but we don't make wine that suits where we live, how we live, what we eat. We sort of make these copies of French things and go, oh, I hope that someone mistakes my wine for a wine from Burgundy. Well, that's just stupid. And then living in McLaren Vale with an ocean full of seafood and making 15.5% alcohol Shirazes was the point at which I went, actually, the responsibility lies with me to make wine that I want to drink. Coming home from consulting in Spain and going to Balariña and talking to Simon where he just had all Spanish wine, and I looked at so many of the varieties that were there on the wall in these wines and going, well, I deal with all of those. Why aren't I making wine like that? And so that was a driver too, to get back to make those wines. And simplistically, I thought I can do this. Well, if I just make a red, because I mean, in Australia, I don't think we really have the wines that they do in Europe in terms of Chianti Classico, Joven Tempranillo, Châteauneuf de Pape, these utilitarian wines that are the hallmark of that society and supported by those people and innately part of their culture. And maybe I'm just trying to speed up the process of time more than anything else, but I just wanted to make red wines that spoke of where they came from. So if Châteauneuf can have a Grenache blend, why can't I have a McLaren Vale that's just a Grenache blend without varieties? And first of all, there's 2 problems with that. 1, it's impossible to sell blended wine in this country, and 2, it's impossible to sell a wine in this country from Australia without the actual varieties and what's in it on the label, whereas it's not a problem if you sell those same wines from Europe in Australia. And it makes me sad that we have to obey a different set of rules to the wines that come from Europe. And I remember being with Patrick, and you've heard this story 1,000 times, being at the European when the first wines I made was a red and a white called Pronto Tinto and Pronto Bianco. And so they said, oh, we really like this wine, but we can't sell it. And they said, why can't you sell it? And they said, because it's a blended white wine. And Patrick, quick as a whip, went, well, if this wine was from Italy, could you sell it? And they said, yeah, sure, we'd be able to sell heaps of it. And that still continues to this day. I'm so proud of what's happening with Grenache right now and all the people that are making these great Grenaches. And, you know, there's a way to go before they're really publicly accepted. But at the same time, the cost of that is all the Grenache blends have just died. You don't see Grenache blends anywhere being sold by anybody. And these wines are beautiful. There's this lemming attitude towards wine, especially Australian wine, that we all have to do the same thing. It's decried recently, oh, I can't sell Cabernet. And I said to some sommeliers, well, that's because you don't buy them. It's not because the people won't buy them. Like, if you educate people, I think Wynn's Black Label Cabernet has to be one of the greatest value red wines in the world. It's amazing, but I've never seen it on any wine list, and I never see it anywhere. And yet I opened a 1991 the other night and it was extraordinary. And so I think they're the wines we need to be really proud of, but they don't get support in the marketplace and certainly on restaurant lists.
Just to dwell on that a little bit longer, I do think you see it everywhere, not just in wine production, sales, communication. That herd mentality is quite damaging, I think. And I feel like you found it quite exhausting swimming against the tide, and you've ended up swimming against the tide on quite a few things, or being ahead of the curve even.
Everything. Everything I do is just like, be it blends, be it Portuguese, be it Italian varieties, be it Nebbiolos, be it whatever, you're constantly swimming against it. I don't know why one of the last bastions of cultural cringe is wine. Like it is, and I was really happy the other day when the ABC did the 100 best books. 10 of the top 20 are Australian, and you see Triple J going nuts and Double J going Australian Music Month. And even there was an ad the other day to, hey, stream Australian music. There's a pride in the things we do in terms of sport. But with wine, it's just not there. I mean, you look at the Chardonnays we're doing, and I think one of the great gifts Australia's given to the world of wine is white wine making. The technology that we've developed and the style of making white wine that we've developed from the top to the bottom is incredible. The Chardonnays we're making in this country, when you judge a wine show, are second to none anywhere in the world. And yet there's an explosion of Petit Chablis. Petit Chablis is rarely good. And it's certainly not valued on a wine list at $250. So I don't understand that. And it's the same with many of the rosés. I freely admit rosé in the past was made like you're making dinner from the bin, leftovers. People didn't take it. And if there's a problem with the wine industry, it's actually taking wines that people want to drink seriously and eulogising them and protecting them. And so rosé, I think, in McLaren Vale is probably, until the arrival of Fiano, the most important white wine we make. So make it out of the best grapes, make it out of the most important things. And yet the explosion of LVMH-based French rosés is ridiculous. So I don't know why that is. And I think partially it's the Guardians who are choosing these wine lists. That's part of it. There's just not enough Australian wine by the glass on. I think the statistics now in Queensland where 48% of all wine sold in restaurants is imported. Now that's sad. And the chefs get it. They talk about seasonal. They talk about that locavale ideology where everything's sourced locally. And in many cases, these guys are going out foraging. The craziness that ideology has with regard to food, then serving that with a bottle of San Pellegrino, which is an imported bottle of sparkling water. Come on, guys. We don't need to import water halfway around the world. That's just crazy. Or serve that with a imported wine. If it's the best examples of imported wine, I don't have a problem. But that's not what it tends to be. It tends to be the lower entry point stuff that's gaining traction. And that's what worries me. I think the wine industry is in an absolute crisis everywhere around the world. And if we don't have the support of our own market, a lot of us are not going to exist. And that's the absolute harsh truth. Western Australia has pulled out more than 40% of its vineyards in the last 5 years. South Australia probably needs to pull out 30%. We currently pay for Riverland Shiraz the same price we paid in 1970 at $200 a tonne. Now, these poor people, I don't know how they're surviving. I really don't. And we're making a whole lot of wine that nobody wants. We probably have to fertilise a whole lot more to get these crops up to make them economically viable. That includes more runoff into the river, which is now killing our ocean. There's a lot of questions and there's a lot of things that need to be talked about and need to be resolved because a lot of people are going broke all over the world. Bordeaux is in dire straits. New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is in dire straits. Spain's having the same problems. Italy, it's a universal problem all around the world right now, wine. But I would say that the Europeans are much better, and especially the French, have a vested interest in keeping people on the land. In terms of tourism to South Australia, the South Australian wine industry brings people to this state 365 days of the year. Yes, a football carnival and a motor racing thing does it for a week each. That's great. But one of the primary drivers of bringing people to this state is the wines we make. And I think that's really, really important. And so, yeah, it's been a little bit of a hobby horse of mine for more than 12 years. You've known me all that time to talk, people, please drink more Australian wine. And I think the issues that are running now for everybody are the environment. So we have to think about our carbon footprint very clearly about what we do. So in terms of all our packaging goods, we don't import anything. And I think Australian producers have to start to think about that, like importing an empty bottle from halfway around the world to fill it up to export it back to Europe again is a ridiculous concept. And so then the cost of living, I just wish there was more restaurants that thought about the affordability. So much of wine list these days is about the glamour of it, about having a collection of Domaine Romani Conti on or something like that. But affordability is so important for people that why not have a wine list that's, max is $100 to $120, and why not think about having affordable wines on for people to drink? So there's some issues there.
Yeah, obviously those issues, as you say, they're happening all over the world, and
Correct.
They are complex and they're very deep. But one of the frustrations that I hear from you and that I share completely is not celebrating and backing where wine or grape growing is in the culture, because there is a heritage here. And I don't know whether it's because of inverse snobbery that wine has never been adopted as part of the culture. But if you look at where it sits in, we were talking to Matt Paul last week from Trenbath and Taylor on the podcast, just the way Italian wines are part of the culture. There's not even a question of whether that's an elite product at all. It's just part of the landscape, and it's absolutely written into the joie de vivre and the point of being alive, to actually be around people and celebrate something, and certainly not to turn around and cringe and question whether it even has a place in society.
No, I mean, if you look at the number of restaurants in Australia that only serve Australian wine, I could probably count them on this hand. Yeah, if I went to Rome or any of the great European cities of the world, it's impossible to find wine even outside of the region that these people are in. But there's this great love and pride and support. They are so staunchly proud of their culture. And when you go to a place like Rome, every restaurant does the 4 same pastas. So it's this strength and conviction of what they are and who they are. I would say that the influence of especially Italians and Greeks on a lot of the parts of our culture with food is so important to us. And so I would have thought these styles of wine are easy to understand, to fit into what we do and the things that we love and the things that we eat and do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and the idea of drinking a nice local wine rather than a shitty imported beer.
Go for it, Ed. I'm here to support.
We should dwell on a couple of SC panel milestones, I suppose, because you said the first Jimmy Watson, not many people get to number them, but the one that let the pressure off, back when you had 31, the Eileen Hardy Shiraz winning the first Jimmy Watson. But the second one, 2013 Syrah from the Adelaide Hills, 2014 Melbourne Royal Wine Show. How was that?
Oh, you can never, ever, it was magic. I mean, there was a funny circumstance where I've always seen my body as a bit of a battering ram, and I think it's probably an ADHD thing again. I'm always injured or doing something stupid. So I'd gone skimboarding. My son had one, and I thought, I'll give it a go. So I'd run down, and my wife's going, watch this. This will be interesting. I run down, I slip off, smash my foot into a rock, and then it got slowly worse and worse and worse. And then I worked out that I'd broken my foot. And so it was the week after I'd broken it. I had to go to Brisbane to do a dinner, which I couldn't get out of. And so I flew down to Melbourne because they said, you've got to be at this dinner and you don't know whether you're going to win it or not. And you go, oh, God, I'd just kill me. I can't do this. And so I was in so much pain from having to hobble around and get to Melbourne to a dinner. I'm going, in my usual manner, and then end up winning it. And it sort of, it turned everything sort of on its head to a degree. Yeah, it's so vitally important to us and our success. And I think the first one just gave me the freedom to believe that what we were doing was right and to push harder and took the critics away, especially in Hardy's. That award has given me so much license in terms of the 2 stages of my life in winemaking. The Jimmy Watson has been fundamental in changing both of those periods of time. And so, I can't ever thank all the people that are involved in that thing enough. And still my sort of love for the show system is part of keeping that system going to a degree in all its flaws and all its problems.
Around about that time that you won the Jimmy for the second time, Camellia project began, and that's something that's very dear to your heart. And you've spoken, I think, very well, in fact, even in this conversation, about the idea of building affection for something and conveying affection for something. And Camellia really is a love letter, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's true. The Australian wine I own the most is Wendouree, because I love the people that make it, but I love the wines too, because they are so idiosyncratic and they can only be Australian and they can only be Wendouree. So I love that wine, and I want to see more Wendouree type projects exist in the world. And so I had the chance, actually that vineyard is where the first Eileen Hardy, half the first Eileen Hardy came from. And I'd asked Don Cant if he'd sell the vineyard to me. And it took 17 years of nagging, but finally he sort of said, yes, I'll sell the vineyard. And we bought it in 2012. And it was in a bad state. The conversation came that he was going to pull the Cabernet out. And this Cabernet's won Best Cabernet at about 3 wine shows and Best Australian Cabernet. And so I was, please don't do that, Don. I'll fix it. And then it sort of brought on this conversation about, well, would you like to buy it? And I hand pruned that whole place by myself, bringing it back from machine pruning for a long time because it was managed very minimally and under contract. And so just brought the place back to life. And yeah, I think a lot about our connection to our country. And I sometimes wonder whether Australian wine is more known for who made a wine rather than where we made it from is a consequence of the things that have happened to us. Because we probably haven't been here for long enough. I mean, I'm first generation in McLaren Vale. But also that I sometimes think Australians feel like we're renting this place and we're going to move somewhere else on. And I think the correction of, and this will be controversial, but I think correcting our relationship to First Nations people and getting a deeper love for our country is really, really important. And all of these things have affected why we don't make wine that tastes like it comes from somewhere, where that's the unique element of our wines, that we need to be unashamable about that. I never really understood how much management of land and bush there would be. We spend more time fixing the bush than we do the vineyard to a degree. And so, yes, it is a very special place. It's not a monoculture. It's a vineyard set in amongst forests. So there are the trepidations of birds, and I leave one block where the birds feed, and I know that. The deer like eating Tempranillo, so I just leave 2 rows at the top. So I'm trying to fit in with nature. And I think to a degree that works. We never get what we call rust mite because there's enough native predators to keep everything sort of in balance and check. And there's everything. There's echidnas, koalas, kangaroos. There's everything going on. My son came home today and showed me a photo of a tawny frogmouth in the vineyard and a bearded dragon that bit him on the foot. So we haven't fertilised, we haven't put any pesticides, and we could say we're organic or whatever that is. It's my responsibility to the landscape to repair it and make it right. And so I can remember a Finnish philosopher saying, if I was to ask you about your relationship and you told me that it was sustainable, that's hardly the optimal situation, is it? I think that sustainability is a bare minimum of what we need to be doing to be fixing things. The amounts of money we spent on regenerating, getting rid of olives, getting rid of all the invasive species, be that dog rose, bridal creeper, bone seed. But when you stand up there and you look at orchids and you see echidnas and you see the wines that are coming out now, you feel proud about that. And I firmly believe that there is a place in our society and the wine industry for warm climate Shiraz, but we haven't taken it seriously enough in a way that we reclaimed the Chardonnays of the 90s and noughties were these big buttery fat things, but we went through this process to come out the other side to go, this is what Australian Chardonnay is. And I think that will happen to warm climate Shiraz too. And I hope it's still part of the pantheon of what the Australian wine is. It's very, very important. It's truly unique, like warm climate Riesling is. If I said to people these days, imagine if Riesling wasn't planted in this country, do you think you plant Riesling in the Clare Valley, Eden Valley or Franklin River, which are warmish places? The answer would probably be no. We'd probably plant it in all the places that resembled Alsace and Germany. And yet we make wine from these places that are great, but most importantly, unique. They're not copies of anything. And, no one planted Semillon in the Hunter and thought, they were trying to make Bordeaux. They're just making this style of wine, again, that's uniquely Australian. And I think they're the styles of wine we've got to continue to chase.
I think you said from the earlier days that you weren't sure whether you wanted to own a vineyard. And you now have 4. You've got Oliver's Road, which is a poster child really for this idea of place-appropriate varieties. I think it's been replanted to Montepulciano, Nera d'Avola, Aglianico, but a Fiano in there, I think. Yeah,
Touriga and Grenache.
Right. And then you've got Camellia, we've just spoken about, with mostly Shiraz. We've got Protero with mostly Italian varieties, with Nebbiolo top of the tree up there, and your beloved Little Branch vineyard. And not only is there the land, but there's also the fact that you're working it, back-breaking conditions with those low bush vines in Little Branch, etc. So I was just wondering how that connection changes from the point of being a wine maker back in the days of Hardy's, I guess, and dealing with growers, to now being a vigneron.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, a lot of Australian winemakers used to think that wine was growing on the back of trucks. I learned when we started the label that I was beholden to the grape grower as to how I was going to make the wine, and I didn't have the control that I wanted to for the quality to come out. It's fine doing wines of, $30 and stuff like that somebody else is growing them. But if you want to take this thing really seriously and make great Australian wine, the only way is to own the vineyard. So basically everything Fiona and I have, we've thrown back into buying vineyards. I think we own about 105 acres now of vines. As of this year, apart from a bit of Fiano that we'll buy, everything we do, we grow. So there'll be no more Old Mac, no more Smart. We'll grow all our own vines. And I think that's so important to the quality of the wine that we make today. And it's changed so much, just the Nebbiolos alone, being able to manage them, be able to shoot thin them, bunch thin them, do the things that I really want to do. I could never do that with a grower. We don't own a winery. We own the gear, but we don't own a winery. We're just throwing every bit that we can into owning our vineyards and exploring those. Every time you get one, it's like having a new child. It's like beauty. This is really good. And watching the wines come off them, putting things like Nero in the ground and watching it come, which was just a hit and a hope. And yet seeing the wines that are coming out of them going, wow, that's fantastic. Seeing what Camellia is now doing, and that's been great to see people take that seriously and, win the James Halliday Best Shiraz of the Year. Probably the first time a Shiraz has won without any oak influence at all, because it only goes into a big old vat. And so that's been good. And then the last picture when we bought Little Branch, 9 hectares of Grenache, and giving me 3.3 hectares of 100-year-olds, like 3.3 hectares of Montrachet. It's fabulous. And the wines, look, it's hard for me to talk objectively about them, but yeah, I love making those wines off those vineyards. But it does push you to the edge, that's for sure. I mean, we've got a lot invested in the Australian wine industry. And my wife actually said, my son's studying in second year now, and she said, are you sure this is where you want him to go? And there was a stage there where he was saying, well, I can earn more money as a fireman. But yeah, let's see where it goes. I still have this great faith and passion that Australia can make great wine in the world of wine and take its part in the world of wine. And I think there's so many things happening and so many inventive, amazing people that are involved in this industry. And that's the saddest part right now. Look, I had problems with the styles of wines that we were making for a long time. And yet now, never have we made better wine in this country and more appropriate wine for the ways that we live. And the varietal variation, the style, everything, it's so exciting. The Pinots, the Chardonnays, the Rieslings, it's fabulous. And to see it in crisis, it kills me. It hurts me deeply. That's where I've had my dark days going, well, where do I go to in this industry, and why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this? So, yeah, it's not easy.
You were also saying that you were sitting down with perhaps the world's most prominent wine writer, and posed the question about whether Australia can convince people that it can make great wine. It's a fundamental question, perhaps a little bit of that lack of faith that we spoke about earlier, that lack of pride even, may even have a knock-on effect on how it's perceived from the outside. But where do you think we are at the moment with that question?
Yeah, and that's why I posed it to Jancis. It's like, do you believe? Because I want more people to believe that we can make great wine, and we can make wine that fits in anywhere in the world. And David Gleave said this, and David's an English master of wine who owns Liberty Wines, and he said, like, you can't beat Australian Chardonnay or Grenache right now in terms of what it is. In terms of fashion, and that's the unfortunate part of what goes in wine, there is always this fashion element, and we're just not in fashion right now. I can remember when I first went to Bordeaux, people talking about the Bordeaux crash. Well, here it is now. It's happening now. They are in serious, serious trouble. And that's sad to me to see that in the world of wine. I had a friend in Burgundy who took his life. And so if there's one thing that's driving me now to talk out about these things, I don't want to see more friends take their life because of financial problems of being in the wine industry. It'll be lovely if people had the pride to buy Australian wine and to help Australians stay in the wine industry. But not only that, all the industries that are there behind it, be the bottlers, the glass manufacturers, the distributors. There is this enormous industry that I'm still very proud of.
You mentioned just coming back from the Len Evans tutorial, out with the 12 lucky scholars from this year
Yep.
and other luminaries such as yourself on the panel, Kerry Thompson you mentioned.
Yep.
How was the week?
Yeah, look, I mean, the Land Evans tutorial is important. There is a much bigger focus with regard to Australian wine in it, and it's a benchmarking exercise more than anything. So it's to show people that are up and coming in the wine industry the greatest wines of the world, which I still think is an important thing for winemakers to understand what is great. I remember somebody said, if I had two winemakers apply for a job and one had the best CV and one's tried the 10 best wines in the world, I know the one I'll take. It'll be the one that tried the 10 best wines. So this particular week is about benchmarking Australian wine up against the best of the world and seeing how it goes. And its major focus is on Riesling, Pinot, Chardonnay, Shiraz and Cabernet. And so we get the scholars in, they go through situations where they're like running a wine show, only where everything's a potential gold medal. And so that's actually harder to judge. And then there's masterclasses on important wines within the world. This year, Clonakilla was the centre of the point, and also Marsans from Tabilk to show what great Australian wines are as well. So it's an interesting week. I'm conscious we did a masterclass on the best wines of Burgundy, and we're going up and down the coast. And it was a sort of thing that hit me like, I've been lucky enough to be able to afford these wines. I don't know anyone, and especially in the beginning of their wine career, that can afford these wines unless you have a rich person who's going to buy them for you. So it's changed now from to be important to educate people about these wines because no one can afford to drink these wines anymore. And so it's a very different world. Burgundy is a very, very expensive thing, as is Bordeaux. I mean, I stopped buying Bordeaux because it's just too expensive. Nobody can afford these things. Tom Carson actually said this to a person the other day. He said, what do you think Steve's favourite variety is? And they had no idea, but it's actually Sangiovese. I love drinking great Chianti because it's affordable. It was the wine that sort of really turned me on to Italian wines, and I think the 21s are fantastic. They're beautiful wines. And so that style of perfumed, elegant wine is where it lies for me. And I did that, and then I did a Shiraz judging masterclass. So we had the best Shirazes from Australia mixed in with some American and New Zealand and obviously French wines from Côte Rôtie and Châteauneuf and Saint-Joseph and those sorts of places. So yeah, it's a lovely thing to be asked to.
Talking about the vineyard situation now, it does feel like a circle has been closed there in terms of all of your visions and all of your experience being able to farm that land. It reflects all your beliefs when it comes to both wine growing and wine production. And everything's obviously hit an incredibly high level, not least the Little Braj vineyard, which is named in honour, really, of your wife, who I'm sure that you have a lot to thank for. In terms of achievement, in terms of ambition, it must be quite an incredible thing to have done together.
Oh, look, it's her. I mean, I'm naturally, a glass is 1/3 full, really, for me. So I'm hugely pessimistic about what the hell can go on and pessimistic about my own wine styles, and that's what drives me along this nothing's ever good enough attitude towards absolutely everything. It's sort of what spurs me. And every time we go to buy a vineyard the day before, I'll go, I don't want to do it. I'm going to pull out. And Fiona's like, no, we're doing it. We're going to do this. I see this. I often ask her, it's like, why the hell did you marry me? That was just a pain in the ass. But she saw something. She's been on this ride with me. I would still be living in my little house that I owned in McLaren Vale with an outdoor toilet if it wasn't for her. She's the one that drives everything along. In the beginning of the company, I got away from making wine and I was having to do all these things, and she's the one that stepped in and sort of freed me back up and took over all the running of everything. She's a lawyer. She's a hugely intelligent, erudite, smart person. She's a criminal lawyer that actually did the Snowtown murders. So she's been through all this sort of stuff. She gets nowhere near the recognition she needs to get in terms of her influence in the wine industry, especially for what we do, her vision and her faith just to continue. There was a time when we bought Protero, I think we signed the contract. Frank had cancer and he wanted to get out, and Rosalie wanted to sell. And so we finalised the contract on a Friday, and the vineyard was on fire on Sunday or Monday. And I was like, oh shit, now what are we going to do? There goes $300,000 worth of fruit. And she just goes, okay, well, we're in this, we've done this, we've got to do this, and we will continue to do this. She's a hugely decent person. She runs the board. She has to put up with my flipping and flopping all over the place. She's quite happy that I don't go to the board meetings. They took me once and that was enough, I think, for everybody because it just go off topic all the time. But she runs the whole company with Tom and I'm sort of free just to do the winemaking side of it, which is for me a great gift. And I don't think many people who have labels have partners as strong as her to run the other side of the business. And it's not easy having to, we have certain rules about when she'll want to talk about it at 9:00 at night. And I'm like, oh, please, no, let's not talk about that. But it's all encompassing. And I see her, what she's done. I don't think anybody really fully understands how I would not be me. It's certainly not any of these things if it was just left to my own devices. I do not have the ability to do what she has done. So, yeah, as a team, I think we're formidable. And I am, 1/3 the person of what she is. She's just incredible.
Yeah, I certainly congratulate you both on all you've done. You've achieved more than most winemakers probably do in 3 lifetimes. And as I say, so many people mention your influence on them to me as well. So it has been a pretty incredible career to date. And I'm sure there's no chance that you're going to slow down. But at the same time, are you just a little bit more satisfied these days?
I just seem to be, I don't know what it is. Like turning 60 was a bit of a moment for me. I'm like, oh crap, what's going on here? And with all the things that were going on, and then that friend taking his life in Burgundy, he's like my brother. He texted me on the Wednesday before he took his life and, said, I love you. And it was just that bit has really spurred me into action where I'm not going to remain silent anymore. I'm not going to, I'm getting tired of all the fights. Yes, there's solutions. And yes, I'm happy with where we're at. Am I satisfied? No, not even close. I think there's a lot more things to do.
That's it for this week's podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like, subscribe and share with everyone. I mean it. Your support makes a huge difference. You can also subscribe to my Substack. That's edmerison.substack.com. Feel free to leave a comment too. I'd love to know what you'd like to hear more of. But for now, I'd like to say thank you to Lucas James for the music, Neil Williams for the artwork, and to my guest, Stephen Pannell. Till next time, live wine to the fullest. Cheers.